Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lotta Pirtimaa. I'm the Policy and Project Officer at Ocean Energy Europe that coordinates ETIP Ocean, the European Technology and Innovation Platform for Ocean Energy. And I will now share a couple of slides for my introduction. Just a second. There you go. So ETIP Ocean is a platform that gathers together ocean energy sector and professionals, and it is managed together with Technalia, University of Edinburgh, and a Wave of Offshore Renewables, and we at Ocean Energy Europe are coordinating it. Today's webinar will be recorded, and you can find the recording and the presentation slides on our website. So if you go to the events and past events, and if you want to receive invitations to our future webinars and information on other sectoral events and consultations, you can join our mailing list on our website as well. So today our discussion is about how data can be transferred from one project to another in order to facilitate and maybe reduce the costs of consenting, and how test centers have a role in that, in all that. So we have two leading test centers today discussing this with us, Caitlin Long from EMEC and Laura Zubiate from BMEP. So I'll let them introduce themselves at a later stage. But this is an important topic, I guess, because the consenting processes now take a lot of time and costs because of a lot of, let's say, environmental monitoring requirements. So we're here discussing how that could be facilitated. And test centers already have a very important role in, of course, developing the sector, because not only because of offering those testing facilities, but also because they can offer simplified consenting because of pre-permitted areas, for example. And yeah, will be interesting to hear from Laura and Caitlin what the thoughts are on this data transferability. Of course, it's not a straightforward issue, because there are different considerations from developers where the data can be confidential, and also from the regulators' side of the topic. But later. But during presentations, you can ask questions just write the questions in the questions box. And also, if you do want to take the floor, just write that in the questions box as well. We can unmute you. That's not a problem. And I hope this will be a very fruitful discussion and interesting presentations surely coming on. So with that, I would like to introduce the first speaker, Laura Zubiate, who is the Metocean and Environmental Specialist at BMEP. So I'll stop sharing now and give Laura the presentation rights. There you go, the floor is yours.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, but we can also see the webinar. So maybe you can just minimize it somehow.
Is that okay now?
No, now we can see the presentation mode with 2 slides.
Okay.
I think.
What about now?
Is it possible to minimize the box on the right side of the screen?
No.
We can see a gray box.
Sorry, I can't. I can see
Can you?
2 different views on my two screens.
Are you able to pull the box down somehow?
No. What about now? Is that
It's
better?
still on the,
Oh,
well, it's still not the full screen mode
we
somehow.
didn't have this problem during test.
We just tried it before and no problems there. Can you see yourself the video of the
Yes.
WebEx? Yeah. Is it possible to put it down exactly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this better?
We can still see some gray boxes.
Sorry
Maybe
about
if you
this.
stop sharing and try again,
Yeah.
maybe that can help. Okay, and now if you go to the configuration at the top and change the exactly.
Okay.
Perfect. Great.
Okay, thank you, and sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Lotta, and thank you, ETIP Ocean, for inviting me to this webinar. I'm Laura Zubiate. I'm the Meta-Ocean and Environmental Specialist in BMEP, and I started working in BMEP a year ago exactly, although I worked in environmental issues of wave energy before, between 2008 to 2010. So I'll talk about BMEP a little bit. We are comprised of two different sites. One is the open sea site in Arminza. We're both in the Basque Country, in the southeastern corner of the Bay of Biscay. And one of the sites, the Arminza one, is an open sea test area with 4 cables, 5 megawatt each, and it's connected to the grid. Water depths between 50 and 90 meters, and we have 24/7 surveillance and emergency response. We have a wave scan buoy recording data since 2009, and the wind conditions can be viewed here. And we also have the other side, Motrico side, is the wave power plant, Motrico wave power plant, which is also available for testing. It has 16 chambers where 14 turbines, OWC turbines, are working, and there are 2 additional chambers for testing. And there's a pressure sensor and water level radar, and we're at the moment figuring out good ways of measuring incoming waves. And well, both sites have taken part in environmental monitoring activities. So what testing in BMEP includes for a developer is the installation and grid connection site, the authorization and permits. There are overarching permits that have been obtained by BMEP, the favorable environmental impact assessment, authoritative administrative authorization, and the license for the occupation of the public maritime domain. And it also involves environmental monitoring carried out by us on a regular basis and the provision of Meta-Ocean data. On the developer side, there's some legal and economic aspects, of course, to be fulfilled. Finalizing permits, which is always managed and held by BMEP, and fulfilling the environmental obligations. Our own licensing, our own environmental permitting procedure had 2 main milestones. The first one in 2009, when we first started. The then Ministry for the Environment considered that because it was an innovative project to do with clean energy and it was a research opportunity, we enjoyed a simplified environmental permitting process, which meant the full environmental impact study was carried out, and it informed the authorities, but it only meant that some of the steps of the permitting process could be skipped because it was seen as a research opportunity. The key issues then were broad because there was a lot of uncertainty. So they were considered hydrodynamics, landscape, benthic communities, ichthyofauna, marine mammals, fishing activity, and archaeological resources. Second milestone was in 2018 when BMEP applied for permits to become a wind and floating wind energy test site. In the meantime, in 2014, the area where BMEP lies, which is around here, was declared a special protection area for birds. So of course, for the testing of floating wind energy devices, protection of birds was a key concern. That meant that it involved that a careful monitoring of birds to be taken into account, and the developers will have to install collision avoidance devices in their prototypes. Some of the environmental monitoring activities we've carried out so far was a thorough baseline assessment before installation works that happened throughout 2012, where hydrodynamics, ichthyofauna, noise, mammals, landscape bentos. And here you can see a map of BMEP and a lot of the stations for various campaigns, so hard bottom benthic communities, soft bottom benthic communities, echo sounders for ichthyofauna per fish. And there was also noise monitoring both before and during construction works. Then there's continuous environmental monitoring, includes seabed integrity, marine birds and mammals, and metocean conditions with different periodicity, let's say. And then there's additional environmental monitoring associated with tests, which is ongoing. Some of this monitoring during tests has been carried out within European environmental monitoring projects. One of them was WESE, which has just finalized, and it presented its final results in UTEC last week. So the WESE project, this is the consortium, it focused on underwater noise, electromagnetic fields, and seabed integrity. And here you can see some pictures. This is the hydrophone installed in the Motrico site, and this is the transects for the electromagnetic fields campaign. And there was seabed integrity studied as well with an ROV. And this is the device, the Marmok, that was installed then within the WESE project. Then more recently, the SafeWave project started last year, and this is the consortium. It's slightly bigger, although some of the partners are the same, and ASTI is also the leading partner. SafeWave is going to focus on the same aspects as WESE did, but also it will include ichthyofauna and some very innovative techniques to monitor ichthyofauna fish. And some activities have been carried out already. So this is the penguin Wellows device installed in BMEP, and some of the acoustic monitoring has been completed recently. Hydrophone was installed to record pre-operational and installation work. Other monitoring activities is what I mentioned before. With different periodicity, we monitor metocean data. We have swell and sea wave height, period, direction, wind speeds, water temperature, current speed and direction as well, air temperature, pressure, and global radiation. All this data is available at the moment upon request, but the idea is that it will be publicly available both on our website. Some of it, a subsection of it, will be available on our website, and some of it will be available via an FTP for different users. Marine birds and mammals are monitored fortnightly in monitoring campaigns since September 2016. This was a requirement of BMEP becoming a wind energy test site, and some of those species of birds particularly sensitive in the special protection area. Additional monitoring takes place during noise emitting operations. This can be an installation work or some other campaigns. So we hire marine mammal observers for those specific campaigns. And then seabed integrity has been monitored both in 2013 during baseline studies, and more recently in 2017, another bathymetry was commissioned to observe changes on the seabed. This is a photo of a dolphin that was taken by a person from Wello during the installation works. Regarding data transferability, I'll talk to you about some of the more recent efforts that I'm aware of that have been done in this sense. So this Marine data platform was created within the SOFIA project a while ago already, and these four, WESE, SafeWave, SeaWave, and SOFIA, they all feed data into this platform. It's a user and password platform. This is the layout. And you can see all the test sites, or some of the test sites in Europe. You can click on them and see what data are available, both metocean or environmental. So there's a good deal of data here. And more recently, Blue Gift is an Interreg project. This is the consortium comprised of different test sites in Europe. And BlueGift, the main innovation about BlueGift is that collaboration between test sites is at the core of the project. So it is, we wonder and we ask ourselves what data and knowledge and resources we can share. And recently we've been writing down what kind of resources and data we can share, in particular in all these aspects: metocean data, biofouling, submarine acoustics, seabed integrity, and others. All of this, most of the things I've told you are available in TETIS. It's also a platform from Ocean Energy. The objective is to facilitate exchange of information and data between sites and developers, enhance connectedness of the renewable energy community. This is our website on TETIS, our site. I've updated it recently, but I believe not everything is up to date, so I'll have a look and finish updating all the information that is there. In general, our view on data transferability is that BIMEP is a public body where we belong to the Basque Energy Board and the Spanish Institute of Energy. And as such, as a public body, we are fully committed to providing a public service via an open data policy and to supporting the marine renewable energy sector. And as I said before, since early days, BIMEP saw itself as a great opportunity for research on environmental aspects. So it's not only a marine energy device test site, but also a place where knowledge can be acquired. So we are fully committed with research and producing data and information that can inform and help the sector. The challenges, as a final remark, as you mentioned, Lotta, one of them is the ownership of data. Unfortunately, not all the data that are collected in BIMEP belong to BIMEP. So some of it may be subject to confidentiality agreements or not. But it is a possibility. On environmental aspects, there's always things to consider, like the data, the information, and the knowledge that we can acquire in BIMEP or in other test sites. There's a scaling up effect of having one device to an array. Of course, some of the impacts will be very site specific, and the knowledge acquired in one site may not be applicable to other sites. And when we talk about sharing data, maybe it's something that we have to think before we start sharing data, is what format will those data have, and have the same methods being used to obtain those data. Because then if we want to put things together and we want to compare them and we want them to be useful for other sites, maybe we need to use also the same methods as well as the same formats. And also, this is a thing that I wonder about. When we talk about data transferability, do we want to share data, raw data, such as an underwater noise recording, or are we more interested in results? Because all these platforms that I mentioned before, they include a lot of data. But if we're talking about easing the consenting process, what is more useful? Are we talking about data, or do we want results? Do we want reports in a similar format? And of course, different formats of data and results inform different people. So the data platforms may be useful for users of wave energy test sites or marine energy test sites. Then peer-reviewed publications may be useful for the scientific community working on wave energy. And of course, all these projects, all these European funded projects have project deliverables. And I want to think that these project deliverables, even if they may not be publicly available, they do inform the authorities, they do inform the European Commission, and the European Commission will take those results into consideration. So that's it. Those are some of the points I thought about when thinking about data transferability and the challenges. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Laura. I think that was very interesting, and you prompted already a few questions there. And of course, if the audience has any thoughts on the topics that Laura just mentioned, don't hesitate to write those in the questions box. But before we go into the discussion, I introduce our next speaker, so Caitlin Long, who is the Consents and Environment Specialist at EMEC. So, Caitlin, the floor is yours.
you confirm that you're seeing that?
Yes, perfect.
Grand. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Lotta, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. So as Lotta said, I'm an environment consent specialist at EMEC. They'll be talking about data transferability and giving you a bit of a test centre's perspective. My presentation is on sort of the challenges and barriers that we're seeing with data transferability, rather than looking at the monitoring that has happened at EMEC or other sites to date. So there we go. So yeah, as I said, we'll be going through the key barriers to sharing data, identifying the challenges associated with those, looking at the different drivers for academic research versus developer-led monitoring, giving you some good practice examples of sharing and disseminating data, and then finally looking at some of the opportunities and solutions to some of the barriers and challenges I identified earlier. So there are a number of barriers which we experience with sharing the environmental monitoring data. The first one and most obvious one is costs. Environmental monitoring in high-energy environments is difficult, often requiring expensive sensors and instruments such as multi-beam sonars or complex camera systems. When there is a high cost, this can directly impinge the willingness of people to share the data once it's been collected, and this is particularly in cases where it's been wholly or partly privately funded. However, with public funded campaigns, there's typically a requirement in the terms of the contract relating to data dissemination, but this is often loosely defined and open to interpretation, which often results in data being uploaded, but with little value in it being published. The next challenge I was going to pick up on was confidentiality and intellectual property rights. So there's several factors that come into play here. If a developer has invested in a campaign to gain insight into support their future development potential, there may be an advantage over competitor technologies by not divulging the results associated with that monitoring. So the data would support future consent applications, and therefore there may be the willingness to share that data may be driven by investors. Due to industry rivalry, there may also be a benefit of withholding the data as it may be of value. This was a lot more prevalent about 10 years ago, and right now we're definitely seeing increasing instances of technology developers joining forces to collaborate in projects such as WESI that Laura mentioned to surmount some of the joint challenges that we're experiencing. This collaboration can be brokered though by test centres, which Laura's shown in what BMEP have been doing, and we've also been doing similar things in likes of the C-Wave project at EMEC. The research that's been undertaken by academic research institutions on behalf of developers, they also would like to disseminate their information, and they will do this through disseminate their research findings through academic peer-reviewed journals. The timeframes associated with publishing in such papers are often quite long and can be a good year after the data has been collected. And this might mean that there's a time period in which the data is embargoed, so it's not actually available. And this is until the planned analysis has been completed and the manuscript has been prepared. In addition, when findings are published through academic papers and journals, they're quite often not that widely publicised outside the academic community, which may restrict how much the developers and regulators are uptaking the information. However, I think this is definitely improving more recently. The next one I was going to look at is the formatting and use of appropriate metadata. So there may be a willingness to share the data, but there's been significant other details that have been overlooked to date. So that's data formatting, vocabularies, and metadata. Data users may think that they want the raw data, but when you get down to the sort of nitty-gritty, they often are actually looking for the process data or the summarized data that has gone through a level QC already. They also quite often forget the contextual data, which is often essential to actually understanding the data. So for instance, a raw data from a drifting acoustic campaign is useless without the simultaneous GPS track data that was associated with it, because otherwise you don't know the location of the logger relative to the impact area. It's also worth noting calibration data. Raw data is sometimes published without the corresponding calibration data, which means it's fairly useless in itself. There tends to be a tendency in particularly our sector as well to create new platforms whenever there's a new project and things like that. So right now there's multiple platforms that exist for different for specific sectors or specific regions with very little integration between them. And often these platforms have no resources available for continued maintenance beyond the project lifetime. They can also be difficult to navigate and not that user-friendly either. And often the platforms don't actually hold the data, instead they just link to where the data can be found. There's also an issue with the fact that the data size that we're collecting, so such as camera data, is massive. And so you need to think about suitable backups and redundancy measures for holding this data. And the last point I wanted to make was about analysis. This is generally an industry-wide problem. Right now, we're seeing quite good funding coming around regarding data collection and surveying, but it's quite often forgetting the analysis phase of it. And this is often an oversight in monitoring programs as well. We're not including it in the reporting timescales when we're submitting these to the regulators. So I was now going to give an overview of the differences between the academic research and developer-led monitoring. So firstly, the timeframes just don't align for these. The sector is seeking answers quicker than the timescales associated with the robust research conducted by academia. They also have differing aims. Technology and site developers are currently conducting monitoring for consenting purposes, which are often drippy data, which is data-rich, information poor, whereas academic research is driven by well-defined research questions with hypotheses. Developer-led campaigns are often focused on reducing costs, complying with regulatory requirements, and justifying adaptive management techniques, whereas academic research is about learning and understanding the environment without the same degree of focus on the technological development. Academic research is question-led monitoring, and it needs to establish the quantity and quality of data required in order to effectively answer the predefined question. Therefore, we can define the duration of the monitoring required. Without research questions, the programmes are conducted with the sole aim of complying with the regulatory requirements with potential to collect large volumes of expensive data which don't actually advance the understanding. As we focus down on monitoring interactions between wildlife and technologies, by their nature, these are going to be rare events, and therefore data can often be underpowered. Though in reality, the results may be accurate indication of the low risk that exists, but it's very difficult to provide statistically robust results in this area, and therefore getting expertise from academia is really important. There's opportunities to standardise methodologies, and this has been looked at in terms of the IEC standards that exist right now, but quite often these have failed to date, particularly where academia evolved, because we're interested in making bespoke monitoring packages, particularly when we're trying to make integrated monitoring. And therefore, it's really difficult to compare these with each other. So when we're comparing results from different sites, it is really difficult to look at the results. Monitoring results are not comparable in content compared to manuscripts and papers developed for publication. And therefore, there's a lack of confidence from regulators to accept those findings. If we can improve the standard of the reports to publication quality, it will require an improvement in literature reviews, the robust statistical analysis performed, and also there needs to be an element of peer review involved there as well. Right now, the timescales for this just don't align well. So I was just going to pick up on something that Laura's already mentioned, which is the Marin data portal. I just echo exactly what Laura said. This is a fantastic collaborative portal that's built up over different project fundings that have come about. It's a really good facility for particularly wave energy developers looking for environmental monitoring data over particularly the last 5 years, or even data from back in the Sophia project. But the key thing I want to note here is it's linked to the ModNet platform, and therefore people out with our sector that don't know about specifically marine data can actually access the data themselves for their own uses. Another one I wanted to pick up on was a project recently undertaken by NatureScot, who are one of the nature conservation advisory bodies in Scotland. And this was conducted by Aquaterra, a well-known consultancy in our field, and they conducted a review of underwater video data collected around tidal stream turbines. Somehow, I don't know how, they managed to convince a number of developers to provide the data that they've collected over multiple years. And this was to do a very high level review to look at the quality and opportunities for improvement in camera data. So they reviewed 128 2-minute video excerpts and tried to come up with a number of recommendations and also a protocol for assessing this video footage. So there's 2 protocols produced, which are really useful for the industry, but then more importantly, there's 36 recommendations. And if anyone is out there looking for to develop a camera monitoring program or a general environmental monitoring program, I'd really recommend you go and have a look at this paper. It's just the recommendations are they're quite high level, but they really are they can be quite transforming in terms of what monitoring you do, and make sure you don't do something that's already been learnt by the sector. So finally, I'm just going to pick up on some of the opportunities for overcoming some of the barriers I've already identified. The first one is funding terms. We've got a clear method here for ensuring data and results are disseminated is by imposing terms to the funding contract. It may be necessary to educate project funders on good data management practices. For instance, in the UK, we've got the Natural Environment Research Council, and in their funding calls, they require the data to be shared on national databases, and therefore the costs associated with data sharing are included in their funding. Another example is guidance to support the data centres and portals. There's a role for national data centres or international data sharing portals to disseminate good practices in terms of storing and structuring data and including appropriate metadata. Technology developers are highly unlikely to have sufficient resources or in-house skill sets to develop appropriate data management plans. So there's actually a role there for test sites to support them in this activity. Projects are often funded to date. They do not explicitly include a requirement for the publication of journal manuscripts or papers, and instead there's a requirement for project calls to encourage robust research and question-led monitoring. So if they manage to include timeframes that allow for peer-reviewed publications, we would see a lot more journal articles and with actual profound research coming out of them. Regulatory compliance. So developers are encouraged to report monitoring findings as part of their consent conditions. That is very good practice. However, the terminology used in conditions are often open to interpretation and does not sufficiently encourage the requirement for monitoring to be conducted in a robust manner. It's recommended that either terminology is tightened and is more explicit in terms of its expectations, or a separate sort of monitoring reporting agreement is implemented between the licensee and the regulator themselves. In terms of the role of test sites, as part of a testing plan for developers are often actively encouraged to undertake monitoring to support future consent applications and industry understanding. As part of that agreement for the use of a test site, there could be an agreement reached between the test site and the developer regarding the provision of facilities for disseminating that data on their behalf. This is quite similar to conditions that exist for leaseholders in the UK. So the leasing organisation has the ability to request data collected within the boundaries of the lease site and hold on to that data then for 5 years, at which point the data is then determined to have no or limited value, and then it can be made publicly available. So there's a massive resource out there of data that's been collected across all the different lease sites. The last one there I want to pick up on was the raw data versus analysed data. Where there may be a competitive advantage in holding on to monitoring data, whether from an academic or technology developer perspective, there is an opportunity for disseminating the raw data publicly, but holding on to the analysed data confidentially. This restricts others from directly benefiting from the data and allows the intellectual property rights associated with the data to remain with the analysed data, which is where really the real value exists with the data. However, I'm aware that this does open the door for others to publish findings before the lead researcher, and also it opens up data to be incorrectly interpreted. I do think there's an opportunity here to find a method for anonymising analysed data, which is probably the best solution. So just to close up on some final conclusions, publicly funded monitoring programmes required to have well-defined explicit terms to support dissemination, with preferably guidance provided in a project call. Confidentiality, intellectual property rights and embargoing data are challenging. However, there may be opportunities in utilising anonymisation techniques with crucial roles for test sites there. There's a need to educate the sector and project funders regarding the importance of metadata. It is crucial to support the adoption of best practices. The interconnection of portals with well-established platforms such as the ModNet is vital to reduce the spread of data across lots of different platforms and to support the maintenance of databases once the project funding is finished. There needs to be a step change approach by funders to ensure future monitoring campaigns are adequately supported to allow for analysis of the data, but not just the collection. The design of programmes also needs to give greater weighting to this crucial phase of the campaign as well. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully that's been thought-provoking and come up with some good questions now to cover.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. Very interesting, and yeah, as you said, a lot of thoughts and ideas there. So now we have some time for questions and answers, a bit of a discussion here. And while the attendees type their questions in the questions box, I just start with first one. Laura, you mentioned that the WESE project, or a couple of EU projects, and I was wondering whether the WESE project monitoring data is open access and available on the Marin data that you mentioned as well. Just wanted to confirm that.
Yes, at least some of the data collected during WESE are already on the Marin data. I am not entirely sure how well populated it is at the moment, but that is the idea, yes, that any data that wants to be shared will be shared through that platform.
Great, thank you. And a follow-up question on the Marin data. Caitlin, you mentioned that it's a great platform and maybe, you know, could be even more widely used. Is it more like directed to developers, or can regulators use it as well in the consenting process?
Personally, I would say it's more directed at developers and site developers rather than the regulators themselves. I don't know about the WESI project, but the Seaway project haven't put up the findings from the data collection campaigns onto that site. Instead, they're issued in deliverables, and it'd be those findings that I think the regulators would be more interested in, because they want answers rather than to go and analyze the data themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. I was wondering about, you know, this kind of, it's not directly data transfer related, but this kind of envelope idea of kind of a pre-consenting an area and doing the monitoring and everything, and then that area could be used for several projects that are somewhat similar, and a new project wouldn't have to do all the monitoring again. Do you think this could be, or I don't know if you're using this in EMAC or BMAP, or
well, yeah, I think to a certain extent that's what we've done. We have the environmental permitting done for the whole area, and the area includes the activity that will happen. Of course, then each test will have to be monitored in a certain way, but we have the permits, we have like the overarching framework for them to be installed, and they don't have to deal with the whole consenting process and going through all the Spanish authorities.
But there's still some monitoring they need to do before installation, or during?
No, not specifically. They have to fulfill, well, they have to agree on the terms. They have to be aware that some obligations, BMEP has some environmental obligations, and because they will be testing there, they need to agree with them. But there isn't anything specific that they have to do. Well, maybe well, we always ask for biofouling, anti-fouling paints and such, you know, materials or liquids that may be used in the device. We need to know what those will be, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add to Laura's answer as well, similarly for EMEC, we've done this sort of site-wide assessment through an environmental appraisal, which constitutes an environmental impact assessment, and that's included the full sort of site characterization and therefore collected the majority of the baseline data. But there's an expectation on the developers coming to test at the site to implement their own monitoring programs. to learn about their device-specific impacts, which would then go on to inform like the array applications that we're going to see in the future. It's absolutely crucial that the developers are collecting data at the test sites that are device specific. So for instance, acoustic data, so understanding the acoustic signature associated with the devices, rather than using sort of the knowledge, the different data sets out there. Device specific, there's certain impact pathways that are really important to get the device specific impact knowledge.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. No,
Go ahead.
sorry. I was just going to say at the moment there's such heterogeneity of technologies that, of course, you would expect different impacts. Some of them may be technology specific, maybe not all of them, but of course at the moment we're still at a stage where technologies don't look so much alike.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't really expect the same kind of impact from two different devices. That's clear. Okay. I hear that there's really a need to kind of to think about the format of the data. And I think it was interesting what both of you mentioned, that if we have a huge amount of data, well, is that really useful? But then again, as Caitlin mentioned, the analyzing of the data in order to then provide the results, then that's something that perhaps should be included in the project, in the calls and in the project cost, because that's, I assume it is an additional cost then to the developers. I was wondering if you have any kind of recommendations or kind of any advice for developers on how they could kind of help or facilitate the data transfer themselves. I know we have some developers in the audience, so if you have any messages.
Sorry, I just didn't catch that last bit of the sentence there.
Yeah, so if you have any recommendations or advice for developers, how they could, as you said, analyze their data or deal with the confidential aspect, for example.
Personally, I think there's a huge role there for the test site. When you've got multiple developers on the site, you automatically kind of anonymize the data by just saying you've got tidal energy and monitoring data out there if you've got two tidal devices. Yeah, personally, I think that's the role of the test site, to step in there and help anonymize it. As soon as the developer itself publishing the data, then it's not anonymized anymore. I guess the other thing is, a long time ago, I conducted a project called the Wildlife Analysis Project at EMIC, where multiple developers testing at the site submitted their operational data to EMIC, and we binned it under sort of 4 very high level statuses in terms of operation, whether it's not operating, or their infrastructure there or half decommissioned sort of thing. And that was quite a good technique for anonymizing it. It meant that you couldn't search into the findings too much, and it did limit how much we could get out of it, but it did mean that it was completely anonymized, because there was quite a lot of profound outcomes to that research in terms of displacement effects. So yeah, you couldn't associate it with a single developer or a single technology type.
Yep. Laura, did you want to add to that? No. Thanks. I have maybe one last question. If a developer has monitoring data and they want to share it, can they do that through the Marin data platform themselves, or does it need to go through a project or?
I don't want to speak on Hydromod's behalf, because they're the ones that have actually developed marine data. They're the common partner between all these different projects.
Okay, sure.
And they're the ones that have developed what is a fantastic platform. But I'm sure that they would be happy to host data. It just might be an agreement that needs to be put in place there.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
yes, I'd
Yeah.
say at the moment the ones that have the ability to upload data on the platform are the members of the partners of the projects. But if a developer were to give us data, of course we would be happy to upload it there.
So maybe also kind of using these existing tools and the marine data, for example, kind of trying to exploit it a bit better. That could help with the data transfer as well. Okay, great. I think we are done with the questions for now, so we can close the webinar. I would like to thank both Laura and Caitlin for the presentations, and as I said, the recording and the presentations will be on our website, egyptocean.eu, in the events section. And I wish you all a very nice rest of the day, and I'll see you in our next webinar.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.